Hi, I'm Steve Kozak, and welcome to TPPA Image Makers. This is our first episode, and I'm thrilled to have my good friend Dennis Kelley as my first guest. Dennis serves as the chairman of the board of the San Antonio Professional Photographers Association, and he's the organizer of Capture San Antonio Photography. I assume that's a local outreach of a day in the life of San Antonio. Dennis, is that right?
That is correct. We are a local camera club here in San Antonio, and we're for fun. We love to go out, network, and take photos and share our photos with each other and learn.
That's great. You know, you and I had a very long conversation at an airport. I believe it was earlier this year, if I'm not mistaken, coming home from imaging. And I learned something about you that I did not know. And I was watching you in the airport selectively choose a seat where we were having lunch. And and you kind of started discussing with me your background. Your background was not as a photographer.
No, it's not.
Well, tell us what you did.
So I did 25 years in law enforcement. I started my career in law enforcement in 1991 with the city of San Marcos, which is just it's between Austin and San Antonio, and went from there down to the Bexar County Sheriff's Office, and then ended up here in San Antonio, where I retired in January 2016 as a police commander. So it was a very rewarding experience. I've seen a lot in my life, and it's definitely benefited me in my pursuit of photography.
You know, I thought it was interesting because you were very aware of your surroundings, and you had discussed with me that you had already found the exits and you knew which way you would have to go in the event that something should go down. Uh, that's a very fascinating study. I really found that very interesting, and I had no idea. You seem so mild-mannered to be a police officer. So
Well,
how has
I
that,
am like that. That's my tactical background, and many of years being on SWAT team is I'm always very aware of my surroundings.
and that's what I was going to ask is how has that experience help you as a photographic artist?
Well, I think visually, always being observant of my surroundings as a police officer in photography. I, just don't rush in to take the shot. I scan my surroundings. I look for the best shot that I can take, and just go with it.
I love that. I love that. In that early experience, how did you make the transition from police officer to photographer?
So when I was growing up, my father was actually a photographer for the National Weather Service in Oklahoma City. So he got to do cool things like chase around tornadoes and all that fun stuff, things that we don't like, that we're scared of. But growing up, my dad would always pass down his film cameras to me, and his father had a dark room at his house. So I had the advantage over a lot of younger photographers, today to grow up using, shooting on film and getting to develop. And I always dabbed in photography. It was about 2010, 2011. I really I picked up my first DSLR, and haven't set it down since.
If anyone knows you, they know you for your work in photographing the homeless. How did you get started in that?
That's an interesting question. So I've always felt that street photography has been one of the most powerful genres of photography, in my opinion. I'm a portrait photographer today, and we go out and we shoot seniors and brides and grooms and all that good stuff. And we usually pose the same way. We go to the same locations. We have our system down. But when it comes to street photography, or even street portrait work, you can't really ever duplicate that same scene, the same pose, or the same candid shot that you might be taking. So that always just piqued my interest into going out and doing it. So uh, after I had retired in 2016, I was going to go down to one of my favorite Riverwalk Mexican food restaurants, and I was walking. I was by myself, and I came up to a street corner. I had to wait for the light to change, and there was this homeless gentleman sitting on the corner, and he looked up at me as I walked up, and I had felt something I had not felt in over 20 years. And I saw this man. He had these deep wrinkles in his face, and the weather um, just the weathered look, and the clothes were just dirty. He had the dirty fingernails. He had the stained mustache. But it was so powerful to me just because I saw a man who had lived a rough, challenging life, and it made me. I went and sat down at the restaurant, and I couldn't stop thinking about this gentleman. I was like, I want to know what his story is. And I had never felt that way. And that's what we may want to call empathy. And, in law enforcement, it's been shown through studies that about 5 years into the law enforcement profession, or any type of first responders, about 5 years in, we lose empathy and we don't even realize it. And I didn't realize it till after I had retired. So after I ate, I went back. He was still sitting there, and I began a conversation with him. I told him I was a street photographer. I'd never photographed anything on the street before, but I wanted to take his photo. Of course, it was dark, and I told him I'd have to come back in the morning and ask him where he would be. He goes, I'll be right over there under that tree. So I went back the next morning, 8:30, when I told him I'd be there, and sure enough, he was waiting for me. And being a police officer, we often think that homeless individuals are homeless by bad choices that they make. And after hearing this gentleman's story, he was not homeless by choice. He had some very rough circumstances in his life, and it really touched my heart to hear his story. And that just made me want to go out and just keep talking to other people and hearing their stories, and find out some things that, outside of the law enforcement career, just hear, the hardships that people have suffered.
Yeah, when we get feedback from classes that you've taught for us, they're emotional about it. They talk about how they were so moved during your class and how it's really affected them deeply. And I think it's because you don't just go out there and take their picture. You really befriend them and have conversations with them and listen to them. Do you mind if we look through your portfolio and maybe let you address some of the images that you've provided us?
Sure, I'd love to.
Let's talk about this one.
So this is Jesus. Jesus, this is one of my more recent ones I've taken within the past couple of years. And I came across Jesus downtown San Antonio, just north of downtown, actually, sitting on a bus stop. He wasn't waiting for the bus. He was just chilling out with a Whataburger drink that somebody had given him. And I found Jesus just to be very interesting. I loved his facial hair. I loved the wrinkles. I liked the beanie that he was wearing. And I felt that Jesus was someone that, I would love to hear what Jesus' story was. So I stopped and talked to him again. It was getting dark, and I ended up going down there the next morning. Couldn't find Jesus anywhere. He was 30 minutes late. Of course, a lot of homeless people have no concept of time because they don't have a watch. But yeah, I photographed Jesus and heard his story. He's from Cuba, and he came to the US to try to live a better life. But Jesus, it was a great sport. And one thing I want to point out, Steve, is with all these homeless individuals that I do photograph, I always try to go back down and find them, show them the images that I've created of them, and build a relationship that where I will go down, and there's some of them I'll even go down and sit for, if I have the time, I'll sit down for 3 or 4 hours and just talk with these individuals. Or if I see them as I'm walking downtown, they'll yell my name and wave. Or if I see them, I'll holler their name and wave at them. So you actually are creating relationships when you go out and do this.
And these aren't chance encounters most of the time, or they are chance encounters most of the time?
I would say they are chance encounters. San Antonio has a huge homeless population, but finding the individual that I want to photograph and hear the story is very hard to find. There's times I may drive or walk around for 3 or 4 weeks before I find an individual that I actually photograph.
Wow. And you said that they are often willing to meet with you when you can return with your camera, which I think that would be the type of encounter you would like to have. But do you ever get encounters that don't go so smoothly?
You know, I would say that 9 times out of 10, the individuals are willing to let me photograph them. There's every once in a while someone will tell me no. I think it's important to know, and you mentioned it earlier, is that it's very important to build a rapport with these individuals from the initial approach. If we approach them, we're timid, or we're acting, you know, we have our introvert hat on, where they can sense our vulnerabilities, and you know, usually they feel the same way, and they're not very willing to communicate, because one challenge I've always faced is they look at me and they think I'm either a cop or you know, something, and they think I'm there for some type of harmful purpose, which I have to explain them, you know, to them, and I'm very honest with them. You know, I photograph very interesting looking individuals on the street, and I always compliment them. You know, I love your beard, I love your eyes, I love, you know, your deep wrinkles, and you know, I would love to hear your story. And if you just start out and you're calm and you approach them, and you can show the empathy towards their situation, 9 times out of 10 they're going to agree to talk with you.
Wow. Talk to me about this image right here.
So this gentleman was downtown San Antonio again. He was actually near River Center Mall, which is not far from the Alamo. And
Yeah.
I was just driving around and came across him walking across the street, and his eyes just popped out. He had these beautiful, beautiful eyes. And I loved his facial hair again. As you can tell, I love facial hair in all of my images. And he had these wrinkles, and I said, I've got to talk to this guy. So I pulled over into a parking lot, got out and approached him. He was very, very cool guy to talk to. I ended up calling this image my father. It actually went to Grand Imaging Awards a couple of years
Wow.
ago. And yeah, this guy had a very touching story as well.
And this one.
So this one's called Really, I'm Not Crazy. This was the only homeless portrait that I have ever used off-camera flash with. All my work is done with reflectors and scrims. This gentleman was actually photographed with a Profoto B1, as you can see with the catch light in his eyes. He was down next to a church. He actually looked like he could have been a little crazy, but I was like, you know, let's take a chance and let's find out what his story is. So started talking to him. He didn't make a whole lot of sense, and that's not a posed look. That is when I told him, hey, look here at my camera, that's the look he gave me, and I captured it.
Just his animation.
Yeah, he was a cool guy. This was actually in Austin, Texas. I love kayaking. It's one of my hobbies that I do. And I had just kayaked up in Austin and was headed back looking for a place to eat. And I came up to an intersection, and he was standing on the corner with a sign saying he was a veteran of the military. So there was nowhere to, Austin is a terrible city to try to find a place to park, especially off the expressways. So I had to drive around. I finally found a place to park. Walked about a half mile back to him. He agreed to walk back with me where I had all my equipment. And so got a story. He claims he was in the military, claims that he lives on someone's property. They let him set up a tent, and he lives in a tent. And so I got his entire life story. I talked to this gentleman probably for about an hour. And I actually, he's one of the few homeless people that have email addresses. I always ask for their email because, believe it or not, some homeless people do have email addresses. They'll go to like the public library and check their email, and that's the only communication they have with some distant relatives and friends. So he actually had emailed me and asked me if I could send him a copy of the image that I created of him. So he loves it.
So I have to admit, Dennis, that if I were to go do this, I would be very intimidated. It would make me nervous. Do I have anything to worry about?
Well, I always say that safety is number one. It was that way in my career, and it definitely is carried over into my street portrait work. Anytime I go out, you know, if I find an individual that I want to photograph, again, safety number one. It doesn't matter how awesome of an image you think you're going to capture of someone. If it's unsafe to do so, I keep going. Maybe I'll come back another day. With that being said, if they're like in a group of people, sometimes if I can peel them off the group, I will. But I usually have to have the individual, if that's the case, they have to reassure their friends, you know, their buddies over there that I'm not, you know, there to harm anybody. And then once they usually reassure them, then everything's fine. But safety number one, I always, always, always take an assistant with me. I never go by myself. So even with my law enforcement background, even if you have a license to carry, whatever it may be, you still need to take someone with you, because if nothing else, they can watch your back and hold your equipment for you.
Yeah. I noticed that most of the images that I've seen tend to be of men. Is there something different about photographing homeless women than homeless men? It's almost, I guess, more heart wrenching, I think, to see a homeless woman, and it shouldn't be that way. It should be heart wrenching either way. But do you feel like there's more homeless men than women?
Oh, definitely. I would say the ratio of homeless men to homeless women it's huge. Here in San Antonio, it's hard to find homeless women that appear to have been homeless for some time. They're usually either taken into the shelters, or the ones that I have come across, the women, for the most part, do not like their photographs taken. So a lot of the ones that are more cooperative are the men. The women are more likely to shy away from a camera.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to look at this image as well. I think this is a really interesting man. He looks like he could be my neighbor.
This guy, he was actually one of my first homeless portraits that I did. He was sitting over on the shallow east side of San Antonio. Happiest guy you'd ever meet. He was such a cool guy. And as you can tell, he almost has a smile on his face. He has that little bit of a grin. But yeah, I saw him sitting next to a bus bench. I pulled up, told him what I was doing, what I'd like to do. Again, another guy that I got to talk to for about an hour. I see him all the time. Still to this day, I drive downtown, I see him walking around, and he always waves at me, and I always wave back. And occasionally, I'll help him out with either some type of goodie bag, or some type of couple of dollars to buy some coffee or some breakfast with.
I have to be honest with you. You did a workshop for PPA&M back in February. Really one of the last live workshops we've had this year. And it really, again, talking to the people who attended that workshop and gave us feedback on it, it really got me to thinking, why can't we solve the homeless problem? And I know you're not, this isn't your job. Your job is to document, but I'm sure you've thought about this. Why can't we solve this problem? It doesn't seem like it would be that difficult to solve.
Well, that is a great question to ask, and a very hard question to answer. I experienced this in my career in law enforcement, because we dealt a lot with the homeless population, and there's a great number of the homeless population that suffer from some sort of mental illness, and the resources that are available to these individuals is very scarce. It's even as a law enforcement agency trying to get these individuals help, we always were it was a battle that we were always fighting. Oftentimes we would lose, and we had nowhere to take them. There was nobody that could help them. So a lot of times the only ways they could get help is if they got arrested and actually got put into the system. It's been very challenging. I know a lot of cities, San Antonio for one, is you have areas of our business districts downtown, and they complain to the police about the homeless population and them leaving trash and using the restroom, on their sidewalks or on their porches. And so the police go out there and they push them in a different direction. And so all they're doing is pushing them around from one, and it's just like a circle, and they have nowhere to go. Obviously it costs money to build shelters to house these individuals. There are some good religious organizations here that feed them. They can line up and they can get free meals, but there's not enough beds for the number of homeless population we have here, and I know it's got to be that in a lot of other big cities. They don't allow tents in places. San Antonio is very strict, unlike Austin, who has allowed them to erect tents in certain parts of the city. So the answer to the question, I think it comes down to money and agencies, and especially when there's budget cuts, it always seems that these government agencies, they're cutting funds and they're cutting agencies that deal with the services that the homeless population needs.
Yeah, I wish it was something we could resolve. It's a human right to be able to go to the bathroom, and when you have
Mhm.
nothing and not even a place to go to the bathroom. It seems like there should be at least public facilities where people could go and maybe even outside shower or
Well,
something.
I was driving by a church the other day near the studio, and they actually now have a sign outside that says showers for the homeless on Wednesdays from 10 a.m. to noon. So
Yeah,
it
boy,
actually was good to see.
we need more of that.
Mhm.
So, what would you say to someone who feels like going out and photographing the homeless is exploitive of their circumstances?
Um, I, I I believe that once they get out and they, hear the true stories of these individuals and the circumstances as to why they ended up where they are, I think that alone helps facilitate someone to not see it as exploitation in a negative light. And like I said, when I was a police officer, we looked down upon the homeless. We didn't want to deal with them. We always thought they were there because they were all criminals. They all did drugs. And then when you get out there and you find out that's not the case, it really changes your perception.
Your black and white images are so stark and dramatic. Tell me a little bit about your process for creating these images.
My black and white conversion, a lot of people create an adjustment layer and they choose the black and white adjustment layer. And you really, in my opinion, it creates more of a muddy image. And I would ask you to open an image, use an adjustment layer to create a black and white image through a black and white adjustments layer, but also open up the same image and create an adjustment layer. Make sure that your color palette is set to black and white, and choose the gradient map adjustment layer option. It will give you more detail in the conversion. And from there, I go in. I do use Topaz Adjust. I use that. I use the clarity option within that just to give it a little bit more of a grungy or gritty look. And then I do a lot of dodging and burning. With all my images, it's very important, not just my images, but for anybody, that the tonality is consistent. In the conversion process, a lot of times like fingernails, they're just glowing. Sometimes gray or white facial hair is glowing. So we have to go in and we have to burn that down using dodging and burning. And sometimes even with the wrinkles, I'll spend 4, 5, 6 hours on some of my homeless individuals, just getting in there, zoomed in with a very fine brush and just getting in there and burning every one of those wrinkles down just to give it that impact.
And so all this hard work has really paid off for you as I I got to sit next to you recently and you were making a little path up a set of stairs and across the stage. What was that moment like getting your master's?
That was an amazing experience. I I've always set personal goals since I was in my undergraduate program way back in the day it was Southwest Texas State University before it was Texas State University. And one of the classes I took, we had to set personal goals and career goals. And of course, back then, photography wasn't really on the radar other than the dab in it, from my dad and my grandfather. But after I retired, I always kept those updated, my personal goals. And I always had the goal to get my PPA Master of Photography degree and my Craftsman degree. So working towards that and having mentors that have helped guide me along the way, it's been an incredible journey. I'll call it a journey. It's been an amazing feeling, but in the pursuit of all this, it has allowed me to become a better photographer, to see things I would have never seen if I would have never entered image competition. And so I'm often asked to critique other individuals' images, and they don't see things that we see, but I wouldn't see them either if I had not chosen this path to go down. So outstanding experience. I would highly encourage everybody to pursue your Master of Photography degree, your Craftsman degree, any degree from PPA, even the CPP designation. The CPP program, that did wonders for me.
Yeah, it's always discouraging to hear people downplay the value of all of those important tools that we have as photographers available to us.
Mhm.
And I think earning that master's, so what? You may never earn an extra dollar because you earned it, but man, you've gained so much more confidence and so much more insight. And it's just really true. You don't know what you don't know. And the people who say, you don't need CPP, you don't need masters, frankly, I think they're foolish. It's a very foolish attitude.
And I tell a lot of the people in the local camera club, Capture San Antonio Photography, they don't, a lot of them don't have any desire to be a professional. They do it as a hobby. But I tell them and I encourage them, even if you don't want to get your actual CPP designation through PPA, at least go through the program, go through the study guides, get the book, and because just going through it, even if you just never take the test or do your image submissions, you're going to learn so much and be in a much better place in your photography.
And Dennis, you actually teach criminology and criminal justice there in San Antonio. So you still
I
keep your
do.
finger in that pie, huh?
Yes, I do teach at the University of the Incarnate Word here in San Antonio. I teach criminology, victimology, criminal code and procedure, and some other criminal justice courses. And I've always had a passion to teach. I used to teach in the Regional Police Academy here in San Antonio. I just love to teach because I know if it wasn't for some of the mentors I've had in my life, I wouldn't be where I am. And I just want to, share my knowledge and don't ask a penny for it.
Yeah, your passion for teaching definitely shows when you teach photography classes and workshops as well. You get such high reviews from people who've attended your classes. And so we look forward to having you at a TPPA event very soon once we can get back together. And finally, being chairman of the board of PPSA, um, do a plug. How do people find out about the Guild in San Antonio and why should they join?
Well, everything we've talked about, PPSA, we've been around since 1968. We have a website that has all of our events listed on it. And I think we've seen a change in the demographics of our guilds today, where we had a lot of studio owners back in the day. That's all most of our guilds were made up, with studio owners and true professionals, or I say true professionals, individuals that earn their living from being a professional photographer. We're seeing a change, I know, in our guild and a lot of the guilds around the state, where we're getting a lot more aspiring photographers. But I think one of the things that I really promote through our guild, PPSA, is our image competition. I will tell anybody that one of the best ways to become a better photographer is to enter image competition. I'll never forget the first time I felt like I was forced to enter by a mentor. And I remember I had this image, and I remember carrying it in, and I walked in this room and I looked at all these images in there. I mean, we had, the Elizabeth Holmans and all the David Becks. We had all these amazing photographers, and I was like, I cannot put my image in this competition. I was embarrassed. So I tried carrying it back to my car and putting it up, and I got caught. So I put it in. I actually won second place in my first image competition. But it was more than just getting a ribbon. It was getting the critique and the feedback to see things that I would have never seen and to become a better photographer. And so I think for our guild, image competition is a huge benefit to our membership. We do have our monthly presenters that come in, and now we're on Zoom because of COVID-19. But the networking, just like when we go to Texas school, the networking alone is worth every penny that we spend to go to Texas school. Just talking with others and hearing, how they have modeled their business, or how they do this, or how they do this technique in Photoshop, or whatever it may be. So, our guild is like a lot of other guilds, is we promote the networking, the image competition, the presentations. We now we have a variety of presentations, like this coming month, or this month in July, we're actually having a business coach speak. So it's not just necessarily about, a technique in photography or a style of photography. We're actually bringing in somebody who's not even a photographer. So, if join your local guild, if you're not a member of your local guild, there's definitely some benefits to be a member.
If you're going to compete, you just as well compete with the pros, right?
Absolutely, right. And that's why I tell a lot of people, they're like, well, I'm scared. I was like, the only way to get better is just to jump in. So you just have to do it. So once you get over that hurdle, and you find out the valuable critiques that you can get, you have to be a little thick-skinned. That's what I tell people. You have to be thick-skinned in image competition, because you may not always agree with what you're told, or you may not like what you're told, but you have to be thick-skinned. If you can just be open to the critique, you definitely will take your photography to the next level.
Absolutely. Well, Dennis, I want to thank you so much for not only being my first guest, but also being an awesome guest. Congratulations on that Masters. It was a fun night sitting next to you and watching that take place. And you even had a wooden bow tie, if I remember, right?
I
Wasn't that
did.
wooden?
It was a wooden bow tie, and you never thought, I've never worn a bow tie in my life. And my sponsor, Ross Benton, and I, we're like, well, we got to be a little different. Everybody's wearing this and wearing that. So we went out. We'd actually photographed a wedding a couple of years ago where all the groomsmen and the groom had wooden bow ties on. So it's still stuck in our head about these wooden bow ties. So we went out and we found a guy who makes them out of, I believe it was Utah, and he got them to us really quick. We wore those bow ties, and you wouldn't believe the number of heads that we turned just with those wooden bow ties, but they're super cool. I never thought I'd wear a bow tie in my life, but so I now have enough merits for my craftsman. So, and if hopefully we have an imaging in person where we can walk the stage, or if not, virtually, but I'm gonna put on another wooden bow tie.
Yeah, there you are in your degrees and your wooden bow tie, looking quite dapper. It was great. Well, listen, Dennis, thanks once again, and thanks everyone for tuning in to TPPA Image Makers, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.